Welcome to Unleashed at Work and Home, the show dedicated to helping pet professionals continue making a difference without burning themselves out. I'm your host, Colleen Pilar, and I'm thrilled you're here with us today. Make sure you hit the subscribe button on your favorite app so that you won't miss a single episode. If you like the ideas shared here, then you're invited to continue the conversation with other lifelong learners in our community. You can find out more at colleenpilar.com. It's the perfect place for you to learn cool stuff, feel good, and take action to create the life you love. Come join us. Welcome back to Unleashed at Work and Home. My guest today is Helen St. Pierre, and Helen is the owner of No Monkey Business Dog Training and also the founder of a really special rescue called Old Dogs Go to Helen. Thanks so much for joining me today, Helen.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
I'm super excited to talk to you. You and I crossed paths a million years ago through Family Paws. So we've known each other for a while, but we don't actually get a chance to talk very often. So, just totally natural where I say let's chat with a recording. Let's do that.
Yeah, well, I mean, the way that the digital era is now, everything feels like it's being recorded or through those kinds of, so I think this is awesome. It's like going to coffee with an old friend.
Yeah, I hope so too, because I have wanted to catch up with you because I'm so fascinated about the work you're doing with Old Dogs Go to Helen, but I don't want you to tell that part yet. What I'd like to start with all of my guests is to tell us a little bit of your journey of when you were 10, what did you think you were going to do with your life? And then kind of lead us through to how we wound up right here and what it looks like now.
Well, it's a long, winding story, but I was originally born in the UK. I'm a dual citizen from Britain, and I was born in London, England, to my mother and my father. My father's British, my mother's American, and they were not animal people. I mean, my mom kind of was, but my dad definitely wasn't. And I did not grow up with dogs or animals in my house. We had a cat, and maybe I could talk my dad into a gerbil that would last for 6 months or something. But it wasn't like I grew up with animals all around me all the time. But I, from a very, very early age, gravitated to them. And so it's even earlier than 10. I was around 5 or 6 years old that people would ask me what I wanted to do. And I used to tell them I wanted to be an insect doctor because I used to try in the yard to find if I found a little ant that was drowning in my paddling pool, I would take the ant out and I would try to bring them back to life. And so animals were always on my radar. But I didn't have the opportunity to really hone in or focus on that until we moved to America when I was 14. My mom moved my brother and I over here. And while I was in high school, I have a knack for drawing and painting. I started painting pet portraits for extra money. I had done a portrait of 2 Rhodesian Ridgebacks for a friend of my mom's, and he absolutely loved it. And he said, my friends have seen this and they would love one also, and you should look into doing this. So I thought, that's great. But this was in the age before cell phones where you could take quick pictures or have access to the internet the way that we do today. So I would have to buy a disposable camera. And I would have to go photograph these dogs or cats in order to develop the pictures and then paint from the pictures at home. And I had no idea how to work with a dog to get that dog to sit or stay or do anything like that. So I would go to the library. I would rent a book on dog training. I read about how to train these animals to do certain things, and I would do it in order to get the picture and do all that stuff. And it sort of developed very organically. And I loved the piece I loved the most was working with the animals. Of course, I loved the painting part. But again, I wasn't growing up around animals, so I didn't have this idea that you could make a career of it, so to speak. So I went to school, art school, for college. I got a bachelor's of fine arts from Syracuse University. But while I was at Syracuse, I paid my way through school. I worked at vet clinics. I worked for faculty members pet sitting their dogs. And then I started working in daycares too. it was sort of like I found that I needed these connections with these animals, and I sort of found a way to get it. And that was what drew me to eventually getting my very first dog, Merlin, a Papillon. And it was kind of like, and that was in my second year of college. And I continued my art career, but as soon as I graduated, I dropped the paintbrush, basically picked up a treat pouch and went from there. And at that point, I moved to Colorado to be with my long-term boyfriend. He was going to be a police officer. And I started my initial first ever real in-depth job with animals, like a full-time job, was through the La Plata County Humane Society in Durango, Colorado. And that was a very, very high kill shelter. We euthanized for space. We didn't just euthanize for behavior. And so I jumped in head first, so to speak, into that realm. And then 21 years later, here I am. And yes, so it really, I'm one of those stories where it was like, no, you don't have to grow up with animals to end up being surrounded and working with them. To me, it was very much a proof of genetics. This is just in my genetics. And it wasn't till later in life that I found out that my great grandmother and her sister used to breed collies, which I absolutely adore collies. I have 2 of them, and were incredibly involved in the horse community and in around the animal and farm community. So it's in my genetics. It's just they skipped a couple of generations and here I am. Like it's like, oh, we're going to pour all of it for that we skip into one person, and it's going to be in her all the way. So here I am.
Yeah. I love Insect Doctor. I think that's super cool. And you're the first person I've met. I've met a bunch who didn't have pets growing up, but you're the first I've met who went into it from the art perspective first. And then, like, let me learn how to make the dog look happy so I can paint that picture of a happy dog. Awesome. Like, how cool is that?
Yeah, it was really cool. I mean, nowadays, I wouldn't, if that happened to me today, in today's world, I never would have really had to go through that because of how instant access we have to these cameras and all of that. But I had to, remember the times you had to wind up the camera and you had to wait for everything to, like, so you had to teach the animal to perform that so you could do it. And so I don't know if the same thing had happened to me today. If I was my age then, I don't know how it would have happened. I probably would have ended up in the animal field no matter what, but I don't know if it would have happened in that exact same way. All the pieces fell together the right way.
Fascinating. Okay, so there you are in Colorado. You're working in the Humane Society. How do we get from there to no monkey business?
So while I was there, I climbed, as I'm sure you're aware, shelter work has a very high revolving door of people. So I started as a kennel tech, and very quickly climbed up within a year and a half to being supervisor of the kennel. And I was the lead supervisor, but also ended up being the one to perform all the euthanasias. So we had 40 open kennels, but 50 runs. So the way that it would work is we'd had 4 rows of 10. And in the mornings, you would shift the dogs over so we could clean each run, so to speak, and then shift them back. But we were right next to the reservation. And we would get a lot of stray dogs in every day because the animal control was built in through there. And so animal control would bring us 4 or 5 dogs that they'd found as strays. Those dogs would have 24 hours to be picked up. If they weren't picked up, we had to go down the rows of the 40 kennels and say, which dog has been here long enough? Which dog has too many behavior problems? We have to euthanize those dogs in order to get these dogs in. And I became extremely aware of behaviors and things that made dogs completely unadoptable, that made it so that they were very difficult. And my interest in training and working with them was really, really growing. And it really was one of those, I started by scooping poop. I mean, that's where I was beginning. But the fantastic thing was that right in Colorado was a wonderful trainer named Julie Winkleman. And she came down to the shelter just to visit. And she saw me working with one of the dogs. And she said, you should really come and hang out with me and watch what I do in my training classes. And I did. And I started shadowing under her. And it wasn't long before she started having me teaching. And I said, I really want to have my own little side thing of what I want to call my own little business. And of course, this is where living in England came into work for No Monkey Business. So my grandfather, a very old Brit, used to say, cut that monkey business out. And so when I was thinking about business names, I was like, what if I call it Monkey Business Dog Training? I was like, no Monkey Business Dog Training. So it all comes around back to my old British roots. And it really just stuck from there. And then when we moved from Colorado back to the East Coast, so I could be closer to my British family, I kept No Monkey Business and, was doing things very on a small scale while also working in the vet tech field because my shelter and vet work sort of paralleled both. I couldn't live off my training experience at that time on its own. But my work in the shelter world and those euthanasias that I did really pushed me to continue doing a lot of work with shelter and rescue and working with those dogs and exploring how we can help dogs in those scenarios. And so that's how it blossomed. That's where No Monkey Business kind of came from.
Thank you. I think that's really cool. So then we have years of No Monkey Business, the training. And then a few years ago, you opened a nonprofit, and it was a very special nonprofit. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what makes it unique?
Well, when you're in the animal world, for me anyway, my experience with dogs and the work that I did at La Plata County shaped who I am as a person and as a trainer for my entire, there's no way that you can euthanize 6 healthy dogs a day for a long time without that really affecting you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because these were healthy, happy dogs. But we also would euthanize a lot of older dogs and all of that. But my mission after leaving that shelter was I would always donate my time to any shelter or rescue that needed me. And so when I moved to New Hampshire and Concord, I immediately sought out the Pope Memorial Concord SPCA. And I said to them, if you ever need evaluations, if you ever need training for volunteers, please let me know. I will do it completely and totally pro bono. I don't charge for that. It's my one way of feeling like I'm evening the scales for what I had to do and perform when I was there. And, of course, if you have your finger on the pulse of a shelter, you're going to start seeing these dogs coming in. You're going to have a lot of connections with dogs that need your help. And for a while, I would foster dogs that were puppies, needed behavioral assistance and all of that stuff. But it wasn't until Merlin, my old senior initial dog, passed away at 15, that I was like, I need a senior dog in the house. I missed the presence of a senior dog, of course. So, within literally, it's like the way that the universe works with me. 48 hours after Merlin passed, who comes into the shelter but this tiny, starved, severely abused senior little Yorkie named Elliot. And the shelter was like, does anyone want to foster him? And I was like, I will. And we brought him back to life. He had some severe issues, but he passed from kidney failure after only 9 months. But the presence of having him really left a huge impression on me. And I said, all right, I want another senior dog. It was sort of like I'd been doing it before, but I hadn't honed in on the seniors, if that makes sense. It wasn't until I lost my senior that I realized how valuable they were. And at that time, we were doing it one dog at a time. But once I became known in the community for the woman that takes the old, stinky, bald, dying dogs, the needs started to really increase. And people from all over New England and rescues were contacting me saying, we have this dog, nobody wants to adopt it. Can you give him a good, few months? And so we started to end up having not just one, but 2 or 3. And the problem with old dogs is they have a lot of medical issues and a lot of times incontinence issues. And we were doing this in our living room with young kids, and all of this. And so what ended up happening was we were posting about it, but people wanted to help. They couldn't take the old dogs themselves, but they wanted to contribute. And they were saying, can we donate for this dog's skincare? Can we donate for this? And at the time I was like, yeah, send it to No Monkey Business. I'll count it as income. But as we were accumulating dogs, I realized, all right, it's time to create a whole separate space for this. And that's where we decided to name it Old Dogs Go to Helen. created as that we at first were as a charitable organization. We weren't even a 501c3. But then as we grew, I was like, okay, we'll go down the road of becoming a 501c3. And it's all just sort of, I look at it now, I'm like, how did this happen? But it was a process through about 6 years to get us where we are today.
So what does it look like now? What does your living room look like right now? How many dogs are you taking care of, and how are you taking care of these old dogs?
Well, we very quickly realized once we formulated the 501c3 that now we were the 501c3, we could really start accepting larger donations, and we could start formulating a plan to have a space for the old dogs themselves, because I had so many people that wanted to volunteer. I had people that wanted to come visit, but I have personal dogs, my own personal dogs, and I really didn't want this sort of mixing and traipsing in and all of that. So I contacted my realtor and I said, I think it's time. We need to look for a property that has a space designated for this. And we were able to find one, thank goodness. And so now we have a 20-acre property. We have a designated space for the old dogs that has their own fenced-in yard, their own little sort of cabinish area where it has its separate entrance so volunteers can go in and go out. They are all on one level, so they don't have stairs, or they have a ramp to go in and out. Pee pads everywhere, so they can pee and poop all over the place, and I'm not worried about my kids stepping into it. And we now have 20 hospice dogs under the wing of Old Dogs Go to Helen. So
Wow.
It evolved, but in a very healthy way.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. It's really amazing because, like you said, the incontinence issues and the smell issues and the skin issues that most of us, when our old beloved dog goes, don't have that, I need old dog energy in my life again. We have wow, I had no idea how much I was doing, like doing it and doing it with love and doing it happily. But when you stop taking care of an old dog and their recurring needs and how it so much affects like where you can go and how long you can be gone and all the things. I just haven't heard too many people saying I missed the old dog energy, the vibe, and wanted to not only do that, but to have 20 old dogs. So it makes you a little special there.
Well, there's something about old dogs for me, and hospice dogs too, because it's not, we don't just, or some of our dogs aren't necessarily old, they're hospice. So that we've had puppies that are hospice, or, middle-aged dogs in kidney failure with cancer. But there's something about caring for them and having them as part of our community in my life that is extremely grounding, and their presence, it makes a huge difference to my young puppies, my house dogs, right? And we do bring them into our main house. It's not like a lot of the times we'll have a couple of old dogs in the main area in our main house too, because that presence is huge. It's a reminder, like we're all going to go, like death is not avoidable. And we're all going to need help at that period. And it helps me appreciate so much more and keep perspective so much more in our day-to-day frivolous things that we take for granted or we take way too seriously. So for me, it's a huge reminder. And you're right, it's so much work. Why would somebody go, oh, I want to keep doing that work? But I also now realize that if I don't do that work, there are a lot of people that also won't, and these dogs will die a really, really scary or terrible way of passing. And I would rather go through that work than have them have that.
Tell me what it's like parenting while living with dogs who are only going to be here for a while.
Yeah.
It's true of all dogs. Like the hardest part of parenting with pets is when they go. But you're in a situation where this is commonplace now because there are so many dogs that go through. What is it like for you as a mother, and what has it been like for your daughters?
So that's a great question. I tell clients, I talk about this often, that working and having hospice and old dogs in the house has been one of the best parenting decisions I've ever made for my kids, because it has taught them so much compassion and empathy and an understanding of what death is and what life is as a result. There are dogs that come to us that we all get more attached to than others at this point because we have such a large one. When we were originally doing one dog at a time, those were some tougher conversations because you have just this one dog that we have to say goodbye to. But what the kids have learned from this is what quality of life is and what quality of death is. They're not scared of it. They're not scared of talking about it. It has allowed us to have so many really in-depth, I hate the word adult conversations, because I understand that when I'm talking to my 5-year-old, I'm talking to a 5-year-old and what her ability of understanding is. But it gives them a whole nother level of wisdom comparatively to people who want to shelter their kids from that and hide it. And the more that you do that, the scarier it is. And I have seen so much more resilience in my kids as a result of this work. And joy, honestly, so much joy, because they appreciate, like when we see an older dog that we get that's come from a really bad situation, and that dog, we build them up and they start running and playing and eating again. They appreciate that so much more than I think the average kids in our society, because we hide it. In our society, we hide death and it's scary. And that's something that I'm really trying hard to stop. I try really hard in a lot of my work to educate people on talking about death.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think your point about quality of life and quality of death is super important in all facets of our life. I mean, particularly your experience in the shelter really made a difference, because quality of life is a decision that does need to be taken into account, that just life is not the same, at least in my opinion.
Right.
And that there are things to celebrate even in hard times. We laugh about it. I was talking to a friend the other day and she said, it's that experience where, like, if everything's amazing and then you get a rock in your shoe, that you're super aware of that rock, but you don't have the reverse thing of, like, if everything is crappy and the most beautiful flower is next to you, you're not super aware of that beautiful flower, which is the same amount of impact on your environment per se, but our brains don't scan for that or pay attention to that. And with the dogs that you're caring for, I imagine there are so many things to celebrate for them on a daily basis. Oh, look, he ate all of his dinner today. Yeah. Oh, look, he's wagging. Oh, look, you didn't pee. Yay. Oh, look, you're cuddling. All these things are moments where you can say, like, look, you are actually having quality of life. You are feeling like yourself. You are experiencing this world. And I think that's a real hard spot as a parent, and also so beautiful. I admire that you're wading right into that and saying, this is life. There's the ups and the downs and the beginnings and the ends, and all of it is real and valuable and beautiful and something that we can talk about.
Exactly. And that the quality of life and quality of death overlap. They overlap because, death is usually a 3-stage process in terms of, like, when you're talking about aging or disease and hospice, it doesn't just happen, right? That's often what we avoid. We want to avoid the dog that goes from okay to suddenly crashing and we have to take them in on an emergency. We don't want that. Our goal with these hospice dogs is, when hospice is, palliative care is when the dog is living a good life. We don't want to wait until that dog is truly tanking to take them in. So it's having those conversations and having the kids understand what that looks like, that these overlap. And yes, he's having a good day, but that's exactly why we're making this decision today. And we're not waiting until I'm rushing him in at 11 o'clock at night, And what's been really good for me is, what I've realized is, if my 5 and 12-year-old kids can understand that and deal with it, then the general public can too. And so we have a responsibility to be talking about this with our pet owners today, because with the influx of people that have gotten dogs, especially in the last 4 to 5 years, we're going to be dealing with a lot of senior pets in the next, 5 to 10 years. And as a result, we need to be educating people on what that's going to look like. And we do not spend nearly enough time educating people on the late stages of life. We spend a lot of time on puppies, on adolescence, and then it's like, oh, I've gotten through that. Now I have an adult dog. But the dogs that I get in, the owner surrenders that I get, these dogs that are left at shelters that are sick or old, is no one's expecting it. I didn't realize that my dog would become incontinent. I didn't realize they would have these kinds of diseases. I didn't realize that I would have to be feeding them at certain times. And so we need to be educating people on that. And if, like I said, if I can do it with my 2 kids, the general public can understand it.
And you're right that there is a lack of information and also, I think, a lack of curiosity about that. I'm friends with Susan McCullough, who is the author of House Training for Dummies and also Senior Dogs for Dummies. And one of those sells much, much better than the other. And she said it was really interesting to her that Senior Dogs for Dummies is not a niche because people think that they know their dog. Like, I know my dog. So what are you going to teach me? But that there are all sorts of things to be watching for with a senior that we don't know just because we've known this dog.
Right.
And that having some information and some awareness about that there are things that are likely to be more challenging for your dog and things that you might want to just keep an eye on, early warning signs that can, if addressed early, have totally different later effects. But she said it was really frustrating to her. Well, I'm putting words in her mouth. My impression was that she cared so much about these older dogs, these senior dogs, and that she wanted so much to help their families. And the families weren't seeking information. And while it's awesome that families with new dogs are seeking information, she'd celebrate that. But to have, put the same amount of heart and effort into each of her books and to see one was valued by the market and one was not, it says a little bit about our curiosity as a culture.
Well, same with our old relatives, right? Well, also because as you reach into senior dog part or seniorhood in humans or anything like that, you are coming closer to the idea of loss. And so there's a pushback of, I don't want to think about that. I don't want to experience it. I don't want to talk about it. And so if I have to talk about it, then I'm coming to terms with the fact that I'm going to feel loss, and that becomes emotional and separates from rational. And unfortunately, as humans, we really struggle with that sometimes. And, when you talk about senior dogs, you're going to have to overlap the conversation of loss, but you also have to be aware of like, look, these are environmental changes that you might need to like, if you live on a second story home and your older dog has been able to go up all those stairs, we might have to have that conversation of what happens when that dog is no longer able to do that. And then that causes anxiety in that animal, which then, ripple effects into other behavior problems, or not even behavior problems, but the dog's overall quality of life because he can no longer do things.
Yeah.
And these are things that we have to be aware of, but it can trigger anticipatory grief. Grief is very painful, and humans are classic of like, I don't want to feel that. I don't want to talk about it, and wait until the very last minute. So it's really about trying to have humans tap into things that they're uncomfortable discussing or feeling. And then we might get more openness. And I think we can do it. My hope is the work that I'm doing with senior dogs is showing people some of that, really opening their eyes to some of this. Like, and people will ask me, how do you do it? How do you do it? It's like, well, you're going to have to do it. If you have a dog, you're doing it too. I'm just doing it on a larger scale, but we all are going to have to do it. So we have to start talking about it.
Yeah. And it matters, and it's beautiful, and it's important. Like, you're going to do it too. You are, like, most people are actually going to show up well for their pets,
right,
all the way through till the end. And it is hard, and we do it because we love them.
Right.
So I ask all my guests to share some words that have meaning, and the words that you shared, I think, actually relate to this well. So you shared a Tolkien quote: "All that is gold does not glitter. Not all those who wander are lost. The old that is strong does not wither. Deep roots are not reached by the frost." Tell me a little bit about that. When did those words come into your life? What do they mean to you?
Well, they have a really personal meaning to me, and they also have, they relate to all aspects of my life, whether it's my personal physical struggles. I've had a lot, when I gave birth to my daughter, I had a lot of childbirth trauma. And so I went through a lot of reconstruction and surgery and all of that. And that quote was about strength, that I could go through really tough times and still, if I had good roots, if I had a good moral compass, if I had that resilience and that strength, I could overcome it. But it also applies to my work with old animals. It's the sign that we hang outside. It's like it starts with bring us your old, you're sick, and you're unwanted, because we see the beauty in those animals more. I will call a shelter and they'll say, look, we have this dog that's been sitting here. He's got 3 legs, no eyes, and he's half bald. And I'm like, sounds awesome. Bring him over. Whereas not a lot of people will be like, ugh. But we see that beauty, the stuff underneath it, the shine that we see is. And then the other part is my childhood. The book that my father read to me when I was a kid was The Hobbit. And so Tolkien has always been something I'll never forget, sitting and listening to my dad read that book to me through a period of weeks, each chapter, each night, and looking forward to that. So there's like multifaceted areas of where that quote means a lot to me. And on certain days, it will mean something different than another day, if that makes sense. But it's that's kind of where it all boils down to.
Can you tell me more about that? On certain days, it will mean something different than on other days.
Yeah, well, it depends on what's going on with me. Like, so I deal with chronic pain as a result of some of those issues and surgeries that I've had. And, there are some days that I will use that quote in my mind, or I'll, if I tap into that inner strength that I have to get through chronic pain and disability, that's where that has to come through. And that's, again, it all relates why I empathize so much with dogs with chronic issues that have issues with, especially incontinence and all of that. I mean, those are things that I'm like, I know what that's like. I know what chronic pain feels like. And I know how chronic pain can affect your brain. And I know how chronic pain can affect your anxiety and affect your ability and want to be able to function and find joy and all of those things. So sometimes it will apply to me personally. And then sometimes it will apply to the animals that I'm working with, or the way that I even deal with the public on how they approach, or, I get so much support, and every now and then you'll get someone that will make some nasty comment or something that's just really unnecessary. And that's the joys of social media and being public with anything that you do. And I've learned, especially deep roots are not met by the frost, where you can feed me some of that crap. You can give me that. And I'm too okay in myself now as a 39-year-old woman that it doesn't affect me the way it would when I was 22, so it really depends what the day is and how that quote's going to help me.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I was filling a lot of that in my head when you said that. And I was like, but I always want to know, am I right? Am I heading in the right path or in a different way? I think that's so cool. The best part of my podcast is I get to ask people questions about whatever's running through my head. So fun for me.
Yeah.
So I think that's really beautiful. And I actually love you tied in the social media piece, because that is an area that for many pet pros, they really struggle with, that they want to be active and engaged on social media. And it feels scary because so many people bring their stuff, the baggage with them, and spew. So deep roots are not reached by the frost. I love that you shared how that helps you, because it is really true. When we can step back and look at some of these messages, they aren't usually about the person they're directed at. They're usually about the person who sent it.
Yes.
And I don't know what the messages are you receive, but I would imagine some would be, like, what is the value of putting resources into old dogs when there are young dogs who need help,
right.
Like payoff kind of things. And you can see how a person could say that message all the way across the scale of understanding, from confused and not really seeing a big picture and just curious to learn more, to snarkoleptic and just attacking of that this is wrong and bad and you shouldn't. And again, that doesn't have anything to do with about the work that you do. It has to do with their background, their thoughts, and their ability to see nuance within a situation and to recognize that decisions always have to be made, like about anything. I mean, you could walk into my house and have an opinion about why I did what I did, and you wouldn't necessarily be wrong. That would be, oh, I never thought of that, or I couldn't afford that, or but decisions are always made. And I think social media skews that so much because we're speaking in very short sentences and little tiny blurbs and filling it. Just like I said, I got to ask you the question of what does that mean to you? We don't actually do that on social media. Oh, interesting. What does that mean to you? That's not what gets asked. It's, what are you talking about? You're so wrong.
Right. Well, the problem with social media for me is, we've lost in our interactions on that, the feedback that we get when we speak to one another, right?
Mm-hmm.
We learn that early as kids in our interactions. I said something to someone and I watched their facial expression in responding to that, and that didn't make me feel good, or that made me feel good. So I'm going to use that feedback to now, modify the way that I interact, or the way that,
Mm-hmm.
because social media is flat and there are no tones in the way that you write something, everything is interpreted or able to be interpreted by and because there's no feedback and there's no real interpretation, everything is incredibly skewed. And unfortunately, what's worrying is if you are not aware that that's happening, then you can get sucked into a really negative void of it. And so it's taken me a lot of time in saying, like, nope, I call it a first face. Have you ever heard of the three faces?
Mm-mm.
So there's a Chinese idea that everybody has three faces to our personalities, right? Our first face is the face that we show the public, that we, when we're out in Target or on social media, like that's our first face.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second face is the face that we see our families and our friends and our close loved ones sort of see, okay? That other side of us that we really show. And then the third face is the only face that you see yourself. That's you. That's the only part of you that no one else really knows about, right? And I tend to do best in my life. I do best. All my faces are actually very close together,
Mm-hmm.
right? But there are a lot of people where their first face and their third face are completely and totally separate, but they're always a reflection of each other. And so I've really come to understand that social media is a first face thing. You're seeing some of that. And that's not really I'm not taking that as the way that I've really learned to put up that wall. So that's been my best way over these last few years in coping with it.
I like that analogy. I've heard that thought process before, but not with it being the three faces.
Yeah.
And I would guess that self-rapport is one of the biggest elements of bringing the faces closer together.
Yep.
That the greater self-rapport a person has, the more aligned all of those faces are, and the less switching that needs to occur to go through those.
That's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But, and when you have something uncomfortable, just like when talking about senior dogs or death or grief, a lot of people don't want to go down that road. And so you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And that is something that our society really struggles with.
Yeah. Yep. And so we have podcasts where we have chats about uncomfortable topics, and then it's safe. You're just driving along in your car and you hear these things, and then you can listen or not listen. And
which is so funny because, growing up in England, you don't talk about your feelings. You don't talk, it's just not done. The other day I went through this whole horrible thing with the old dogs where we were scammed out of money and I went into the bank sobbing, crying and sobbing. And I was thinking to myself, my grandfather would be rolling over in his grave if he saw me crying in public, because it's just not done. So it's so interesting that I've gone from this British kid where you just sit tight, be quiet, all of that, to let's talk about death. and sadness and crying. It's like I had to go big or go home in order to do it.
Which is awesome because that allows you to go big on the good stuff too.
Yes, exactly.
Like you really can, you can be sobbing in a bank and delighting in a moment.
Yeah.
Both. You've got the range.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I say that to my husband all the time. I'm really lucky that I feel everything. I feel everything. And I grieve these old dogs when they die. And I absolutely feel so much loss and love for them. But how lucky am I to feel that? That's really living,
Yeah.
And that means that I find so much joy in their recovery, and then I feel loss in their passing. But I'm not emotionally bored. I'm really feeling that, and I feel lucky. I used to curse that when I was younger, and now I feel really lucky that I feel it.
That's my experience as well. I used to curse it when I was younger, and now I'm like, oh yeah. I feel it all. Sometimes it's not pleasant, but I'm so grateful that I can and I do. But I don't know, 40 years of trying not to feel it all was more exhausting than just leaning in and going, yep, here we go.
Yep, exactly.
The waves are crashing over me. It's the good ones. Oh, wait, here's a bad one. Okay, we'll get them all. This is awesome. So if people want to learn more about you and your work, Helen, how could they do that?
So they can learn more about me through 2 websites. The best one is No Monkey Business Dog Training. If you want to learn about the work that I do with dogs in general, whether it's, behavior or any of that, or if you want to learn about my old dogs work, you can go to Old Dogs Go to Helen. They do, sometimes they overlap. I'm doing a course called The Good Death, where I talk about death as a process for pet owners, and that's listed on No Monkey Business Dog Training. It's not part of the 501c3, but the proceeds of people who go to that course goes to the 501c3. So they're usually intertwined with each other a lot. So both of those websites are great.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for diving in and talking to me today about death and grief and real life and beauty.
You're welcome.
And all the things. I love it. I am so much the kind of person who just really wants to have like a deep, let's have a deep conversation.
Yes.
I cannot talk about the weather. I'm not good at that. But want to talk about death? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, that's me too. So we were fast friends from the beginning. Absolutely.
It's sort of like the introverts, quick connection kind of piece of like, can we just jump ahead of that, like getting to know you part and talk about something that's meaningful?
Yeah. Let's talk about childhood trauma. Hi, nice to meet you. What happened to you when you were a kid? And then it's like, oh, all right, cool. We got that out of the way. Now we can talk about anything.
Indeed. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. I'm super grateful. It was so fun talking to you.
Oh, you're welcome. Anytime.
Thanks for listening to Unleashed at Work and Home. I invite you to come learn more at ColleenPilar.com, where you can be steady, be strong, and belong.